Welcome to QuickSpeak English, the podcast that makes learning English a breeze. Today, we're going to talk about something that can be a real challenge when you're learning something new, like, a language.
Yeah.
And that is overthinking.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Overthinking, it's basically when your thoughts just kind of get stuck in this loop, and often they're focused on negative things.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
You might worry about things that haven't even happened yet.
Right.
Things that are totally out of your control, or even, past mistakes. You just keep replaying those same things over and over in your mind.
So it's kind of like your mind is a hamster on one of those wheels.
Yeah.
Just going round and round, but not really getting anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of thinking, it can really make you feel anxious and stressed.
Right.
And then when you're feeling that way, it makes it so much harder to focus on the things that you actually want to learn and enjoy.
Absolutely. It definitely makes it hard to feel confident and motivated when you're learning a new language, especially if you're constantly second-guessing yourself,
Oh, for sure. But the good news is there are actually a lot of really effective strategies that you can use to kind of manage that overthinking.
Okay, good.
And free your mind up to focus on, reaching your language learning goals.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
So let's dive into some of those strategies then. What's one approach that you find particularly helpful for calming a busy mind?
Well, one technique that I find really powerful is something called mindful walking.
Mindful walking. Okay, I've heard of mindfulness, but what does mindful walking involve?
Well, it's actually a very simple practice. It combines physical activity with, as I said, mindfulness.
Okay.
So essentially, you just go for a walk, right?
Right.
Preferably somewhere peaceful and pleasant.
Right.
And as you're walking, you just focus all your attention on each step you take, your breath, and the sensations that you're feeling in your body.
Okay, so it's not just about getting exercise. It's about really being present in the moment as you walk.
Yes, exactly. It's about kind of shifting your attention away from those, all those thoughts and worries.
Right.
And just tuning into your physical experience.
I can see how that would be really helpful in calming the mind. It's like hitting the reset button on your thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And what's really interesting is that this simple act of just focusing on your physical sensations, it can actually have a really profound impact on your mental state.
Really?
Yeah. It can help you reduce anxiety, improve your mood, and it can even enhance your mental clarity.
And all of those things are incredibly helpful for language learning.
Absolutely.
When you're calmer and more focused,
Yeah.
you're just more likely to be able to absorb new information, right?
Right.
And to communicate more effectively.
Absolutely. And the best part is that anybody can do it.
Yeah.
You don't need any special equipment or training or anything. You can really do it anywhere, anytime.
So if any of our listeners want to give mindful walking a try, what's the best way to get started?
Well, I would suggest finding a comfortable path where you can walk without any distractions. Maybe it's a park or a nature trail or even just around your neighborhood.
Sure.
And then as you begin walking, just bring your attention to your breath. Notice the sensation of the air as it enters and leaves your body. Feel the rhythm of your breath as you walk.
That sounds relaxing already. What else should we be focusing on?
Well, as you continue walking, start to pay attention to your feet as they make contact with the ground, Just feel the sensation of each step. Notice the way your body moves as you walk. And, if you find your mind wandering, which it inevitably will, just gently guide your attention back to your breath and your physical sensations.
Right. So it's about acknowledging those thoughts, but not letting them carry you away.
Yeah.
Just letting them pass by like clouds.
Precisely. And the more you practice mindful walking, the easier it will become to stay present and just let go of those distracting thoughts.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
Now, mindful walking is obviously a great way to kind of calm the mind in the moment. But what about those persistent negative thoughts that keep coming back? How can we address those more directly?
Well, that's where cognitive behavioral therapy techniques or CBT techniques can be really helpful.
I've heard of CBT, but I'm not exactly sure what it involves. Can you explain it in simple terms?
Sure. CBT is a type of therapy that focuses on identifying and changing negative thought patterns. The ones that can lead to those unwanted feelings and behaviors.
Okay.
And it's based on the idea that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interconnected.
So if we can change our negative thoughts, we can also change how we feel and act.
Exactly. And CBT offers a whole variety of techniques for doing just that.
Okay. Can you give us an example of a specific CBT technique that could be helpful for managing overthinking?
Certainly. One really effective technique is called cognitive restructuring.
Cognitive restructuring. What does that involve?
Well, it involves taking a closer look at your negative thoughts and actually challenging them. For example, imagine a language learner who's thinking, I'm never going to be fluent, or I'm just not good at languages.
Yeah, I think a lot of language learners can probably relate to that feeling. It's easy to get discouraged, especially when you're first starting out.
Oh, absolutely. But the problem with that kind of thinking is that it's often based on assumptions and generalizations rather than facts.
So it's like we're jumping to conclusions without really examining the evidence.
Exactly. And with cognitive restructuring, what you would do is work on identifying these unhelpful thought patterns and then challenging them by asking yourself questions like, is this thought really true? Or, what evidence do I actually have to support this thought?
So in the case of the language learner who thinks they'll never be fluent, they might ask themselves, is it really true that I'm not good at languages? Or am I just struggling with this one particular grammar rule?
Exactly. And they might also ask themselves, well, have I made any progress at all? Or can I think of any times when I've successfully communicated in this language, even if it was just a few words or phrases?
Right, right. So it's about taking a more balanced and realistic view of the situation.
Exactly. And by challenging those negative thoughts, you can start to replace them with more positive and helpful ones.
That makes sense. So cognitive restructuring is about identifying and challenging those unhelpful thought patterns. What other CBT techniques can be helpful?
Well, another really powerful technique is called behavioral experiments.
Behavioral experiments. What are those?
It involves testing out your negative predictions, but in real life situations.
Okay, can you give us an example of how this might work for a language learner?
Sure. Let's say a language learner is absolutely terrified of speaking English in public.
Right.
They might have thoughts like, everyone's going to laugh at me, or I'm going to freeze up and I won't be able to say anything.
Yeah, that's a common fear. I know I felt that way when I was first learning English.
Yeah, it's totally understandable. But the problem is these fears often prevent people from actually practicing and improving their speaking skills.
Right. So how can a behavioral experiment help in this situation?
Well, instead of avoiding speaking situations altogether, you would encourage the learner to kind of start small and gradually work their way up to those more challenging situations.
Okay.
For example, they might start by practicing speaking with a close friend or family member, someone who's supportive and understanding.
Right. So that's like a safe and comfortable environment to practice in.
Exactly. And once they feel more confident, then they could try joining a language exchange group online where they can interact with other learners from around the world.
Ooh, that sounds like a fun and supportive way to practice speaking.
It is. And the key is that with each small step, they're gathering evidence to challenge their negative predictions.
So they're essentially proving to themselves that their fears are often unfounded.
Precisely. And as they experience more success, the confidence grows and they become less afraid to speak.
This is all really helpful information. It's really encouraging to know that there are techniques like cognitive restructuring and behavioral experiments that can help us challenge our negative thoughts and kind of, overcome our fears.
Now, before we move on, I want to ask you about another strategy that you mentioned earlier, and that's designating a daily worry period. Can you explain how that works?
Of course. This is a really practical technique that can help you manage your worry more effectively by actually giving it a specific time and place.
So I would actually schedule time in my day to just sit and worry. That seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, it might seem a little strange at first, but trust me, it can be surprisingly effective.
Okay.
The key is that, throughout the day, whenever a worry pops into your head, you just, gently acknowledge it.
Right.
And then tell yourself, okay, I'm going to deal with this during my worry period.
So I'm not suppressing the worry, I'm just postponing it. Exactly. And this can really help prevent those worries from taking over your thoughts and, distracting you from other things that you want to focus on.
Right. Like learning English.
Exactly. It's like you're creating a container for those worries so they don't spill out and mess up everything else.
Right. I like that analogy. But what do I actually do during this, designated worry time?
Well, during your worry period, you just sit down, maybe with a notebook and pen, and you just allow yourself to fully explore all those worries that you've been setting aside,
Okay.
So write them down, think them through, maybe even try to come up with some potential solutions.
So it's not just about stewing in those worries, it's about actively engaging with them.
That's right. But the important thing is to stick to that time limit.
Okay.
Once those 20 or 30 minutes are up, close the notebook and move on. Preferably to something enjoyable and relaxing.
Okay, but what if I'm still feeling worried when the timer goes off?
That's okay. You can gently remind yourself, that you've given those worries their due attention. And now it's time to shift your focus to something else. And if those worries come back later, well, you can simply tell yourself, I'll address this during my next worry period.
Okay, so it's about creating a healthy boundary,
Mm,
you know,
yeah,
between worry time and the rest of my day.
exactly.
Okay, I like that. Are there any other strategies that can be helpful in escaping the overthinking trap?
Oh, absolutely. Aside from mindful walking, CBT techniques, and the worry period, there are a ton of other tools that you can use. One that I often recommend is mindfulness meditation.
Okay. Now, we talked about mindfulness in the context of walking, but how is mindfulness meditation different?
Well, mindfulness meditation is a practice where you're basically training your mind to focus on the present moment
Mm,
without judgment.
okay.
And you can do this by, paying attention to your breath, your body, sounds around you, things like that.
So it's like training your mind to be more aware and present instead of getting lost in thoughts about, the past or the future.
Exactly. And the more you practice mindfulness meditation, the better you become at noticing when your mind starts to wander, and then gently guiding it back to the present moment.
Right, right. I imagine this takes practice, just like mindful walking.
It does, but even a few minutes of mindfulness meditation each day can really make a big difference.
Hmm. What are some of the benefits of mindfulness meditation?
Well, mindfulness meditation has actually been shown to reduce stress, improve focus, increase feelings of calm and well-being, and all these benefits can be really helpful for language learners.
Yeah, I can see how that would be the case. When you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, it's much harder to learn and remember new information.
It is. And when you're able to focus your attention more easily, well, you can make more progress in your language studies.
So mindfulness meditation is another powerful tool for, managing overthinking and enhancing language learning. What other strategies can you share with us?
Well, another approach that can be really helpful is to simply engage in activities that you enjoy, things that bring you joy and help you shift your focus away from your worries.
Okay, what kind of activities are you thinking of?
Well, it could be anything, really. Anything that you find enjoyable and absorbing. For some people, it might be physical activities, like going for a run or dancing or playing sports. For others, it might be creative pursuits like painting or writing or playing music.
So it's about finding healthy distractions that can help us break free from those negative thought patterns.
Precisely. And it's important to choose activities that really engage you, things that bring you a sense of fulfillment. When you're fully immersed in something you enjoy, well, it's much easier to let go of those worries and anxieties.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just about distracting yourself. It's about finding activities that nourish your mind and spirit.
Exactly. And sometimes the best way to deal with overthinking is to simply get out of your head and into your body.
Yeah, I like that. It's a reminder that we're not just thinking beings. We're also physical beings with a need to move and engage with the world around us.
That's right. And when we connect with our bodies through movement and activity, well, we can release tension, boost our mood, and quiet those racing thoughts.
This is all incredibly helpful information. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, and that's the hidden causes of overthinking.
hmm
What are some of the underlying factors that can contribute to this mental habit?
Oh, that's a great question. Overthinking is often a symptom of something deeper going on.
Okay.
It can be triggered by fear, particularly fear of the unknown or fear of failure.
I can see how fear could lead to overthinking. When we're afraid, our minds tend to go into overdrive,
Right.
trying to anticipate and control every possible outcome.
Exactly. And this can actually create a vicious cycle where the more we worry, the more afraid we become.
Right. So it's important to address those underlying fears if we want to, manage overthinking effectively.
It is. And sometimes past experiences can also play a role in overthinking, especially traumatic ones.
Trauma. In what way?
Well, trauma can have a lasting impact on the brain.
Okay.
It can make us more sensitive to stress and more likely to perceive threats even when they're not really present.
So it's like our brains are constantly on high alert,
Yeah.
scanning for danger.
Yeah.
And this can lead to excessive worry and anxiety.
Exactly. And it's important to note that brain chemistry can also contribute to overthinking.
Brain chemistry. Are you saying there's a biological component to overthinking?
Yeah, there can be. Imbalances in certain brain chemicals, particularly serotonin, can make someone more prone to anxiety and overthinking. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that regulates mood.
So it's not just a matter of willpower or positive thinking. There are actual physiological factors at play.
That's right. And this is why it's so important to seek professional help if you're dealing with chronic overthinking, especially if it's interfering with your daily life.
Absolutely. Therapy and medication can be very effective in addressing these underlying issues.
They can. Now, aside from fear, trauma, and brain chemistry, there are also certain personality traits that can make someone more susceptible to overthinking.
Like what, for instance?
Perfectionism is a big one.
Perfectionism. How so?
Well, perfectionists tend to hold themselves to impossibly high standards, and they're constantly striving for flawlessness.
Which, let's face it, is an unattainable goal.
Exactly. And because of this, they often get caught up in, analyzing their every move, second-guessing their decisions, and just constantly worrying about making mistakes.
Yeah, I know a lot of language learners who really struggle with perfectionism. They want to sound exactly like a native speaker right away, and when they make mistakes, they get so discouraged.
That's such a common experience, and it's important to remember that making mistakes is an essential part of the learning process.
Right.
In fact, it's how we learn and grow.
So instead of striving for perfection, we should be focusing on progress and embracing those mistakes as opportunities to learn.
Exactly, and this can be a real shift in mindset for perfectionists.
For sure. Are there any other personality factors that can contribute to overthinking?
Yes. A need for excessive control is another common one.
Control?
Yes. Some people have a very strong need to control, everything in their lives. And when they feel like things are out of their control, it can trigger that anxiety and overthinking.
So they try to overthink their way into feeling in control.
Exactly. They might overplan, overanalyze, and overprepare as a way to manage their anxiety. But ironically, this often just leads to more stress.
It's a vicious cycle.
It can be. And it's also important to remember that external factors can play a role in overthinking too.
Okay.
Things like a stressful job, family problems, financial worries, or even just living in a chaotic or unpredictable environment. These can all contribute.
So it's not always about us or like our internal wiring.
Right.
And sometimes it's just the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Precisely. And it's really crucial to be aware of these external stressors so we can take steps to manage them more effectively.
This has been incredibly insightful. It's clear that overthinking is a really complex issue, with many potential causes. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we discussed earlier, and that's self-compassion. It seems like this is a really crucial element in overcoming overthinking.
It really is. You see, a lot of people who overthink are also very self-critical. They have this really harsh inner critic that's constantly judging and evaluating them.
And this just fuels the cycle of overthinking.
Exactly. So cultivating self-compassion is essential.
Okay.
It's about learning to treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a good friend.
It's about being on your own side, especially when you're struggling.
Precisely. And this can make a world of difference in managing overthinking. And it can improve your overall well-being, too.
This has been a fascinating and incredibly helpful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure.
And for our listeners, if you're feeling overwhelmed by overthinking, just remember that you're not alone. Okay. There are many strategies and resources available to help you manage it, and it's important to reach out for support if you need it. Don't hesitate to talk to a therapist or counselor if you're feeling stuck. And remember, being kind to yourself is essential, especially when you're learning something new and challenging, like a language.
Oh, I completely agree. Self-compassion can make a huge difference in, how you approach learning and how you handle setbacks.
Like being your own cheerleader instead of your own worst critic.
Exactly. And when you approach learning with that spirit of self-compassion, you're much more likely to stay motivated and enjoy the process, even when things get tough.
This has been a really helpful conversation. I know our listeners will appreciate all of the practical advice and insights that you've shared today.
Well, I hope so. It's been my pleasure talking with you.
And for our listeners, if you'd like to explore this topic further, we have some additional resources for you. Be sure to visit our website. You'll find the link in the description of this episode. We put together a vocabulary list with definitions of some of the key terms we discussed today, as well as some exercises to help you practice using these words in your own English conversations.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more helpful tips on improving your English and your well-being.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of Quick Speak English.
Absolutely. And, if you're feeling really stuck, don't hesitate to talk to a therapist or a counselor or someone like that. And remember to be kind to yourself, okay? That's so important, especially when you're learning something new and challenging, like a language.
It really is. Self-compassion can make a huge difference in how you approach learning and how you handle those inevitable setbacks.
Yeah. It's like you're being your own cheerleader instead of, your own worst critic. Exactly. And when you approach learning with that spirit of self-compassion, you're just so much more likely to stay motivated and actually enjoy the process, even when things get tough, which they will.
Well, this has been a really helpful conversation. I know our listeners are going to really appreciate all of the advice and the insights that you've shared today, so thank you.
Well, I hope so. It's been my pleasure talking with you.
And for our listeners, if you want to kind of dive into this topic a little bit deeper, we have some additional resources for you on our website, so be sure to check that out. You can find the link in the description of this episode. We put together a vocabulary list with definitions of, some of the key terms that we talked about today, as well as some exercises that can help you practice using those words in your own English conversations.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more helpful tips on improving your English and your overall well-being.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on QuickSpeak English.